Is there an acronym to the name? What is the meaning in the name? Thank you, Randall, for leaving these questions. So Randall is asking if our name Urpoise is an acronym and what's the meaning of it. So yes, the name Urpoise is an acronym and it is layered with meanings. So for example, the surface level meaning of Urpoise is users of received power over intellect, senses, and emotions. And what this means is that an Urpoise person uses the power that he or she gets from the unknowable. And the unknowable is the innermost part of all living beings and the ultimate source of existence. Now, no one knows or can know anything about the unknowable that's within, and neither does this matter one bit. What matters is that we learn to use the power that it provides to guide our intellect. The intellect being a mental tool that, when used appropriately, helps us find truth, solve problems, and also cultivate accurate thoughts about ourselves and about the world around us. Now, when this tool is used inappropriately, that's when people fall into superstition or thinking too high or thinking too low about themselves. So we aim to use the power received to develop the intellect into a supportive member of our being, right? Next, we have the senses. And what are the 5 traditional senses? The touch, the taste, the sight, the sound, the smell, right? These are the 5 senses. And so these are also the tools that we use to gather information from the outer physical world to bring back into the inner world, right? And so these senses, they have to be trained, and they have to be trained so they can be supportive. Because if they're left untrained, what they do is they enslave the human to fleshly passions, and they have the human engaging in all sorts of counterproductive types of activities. For instance, in the United States of America, there's a major problem with people being overweight. And as of this year, nearly 70% of Americans are classified as being overweight. And being overweight is a condition that drastically increases the risk of having heart disease, which is the #1 cause of death for Americans, right? And so what causes Americans to be overweight is 1, a lack of exercise, and 2, unhealthy eating habits. Americans are addicted to sugars that do not contain any fiber. They're addicted to foods that are excessive in sodium. They're addicted to these high cholesterol diets. They're also addicted to foods that are high in saturated fats, right? And so most Americans, they have not properly trained their taste sense to properly function in a civilized setting. Understand, their taste sense is still functioning as if they were living out there in the wild somewhere, right? Because out in the wild is where the taste sense developed, right? And in that environment, it would have been much more beneficial to have the taste sense adjusted to eating those types of food, because food was a lot more scarce and humans were not sedentary like many people are today in the West. They were always on the move, so they needed these higher calorie dense foods to sustain them for longer periods of time. But that's not the case today, right? Today we live in a completely different environment under a completely different set of circumstances, right? We're not out there in the wild hunting for food, right? And always on the go. Westerners, for the most part, are sedentary and they go to the store to buy food, or they buy it online and have it delivered to them, right? Completely different from when the taste sense is developed. And so during this process of buying food online or going to the store, people make conscious decisions about what they want to eat, right? And they decide from the vast variety of foods that are available. And what is happening is that Americans are making these conscious decisions using their intellect, which has been held hostage and hijacked by the primitive taste buds. And these primitive taste buds are causing them to select the foods that are most stimulating to the tongue, opposed to choosing the foods that are most healthy for the body. Understand? And unfortunately, the foods that are highly stimulating to the tongue are the foods that contain sugars with no fibers. They're excessively high in salts. They have high cholesterol and they have high amounts of saturated fats, right? And these foods are responsible for the death. And so in other words, what people have done is they have brought primitive human animal appetites into a 21st century civilized world, right? And they're literally eating themselves to death. Do you see that? So the taste sense is simply misguided and it needs to be retrained, and it also needs to be redirected to serve as a supporting member of our own being, and also to fit properly into the current society that we live in right now today. And so this is just one example of one of the senses that needs to be retrained for a lot of people today. There are other senses that also have to be retrained as well, right? People touch on things that don't belong to them, right? Or they touch on things that they shouldn't touch on, right? That's one thing that has to be retrained. They also look at things that they probably have no business looking at. People listen to music that probably isn't in their best interest to listen to. And this is important because these are the senses that you use to gather information about the outside world and then transmit back into the inner world, which shapes the way you interpret your reality. So it is most important that we use the received power to guide our senses so they can become supportive members of our being while we're on the path. Understand? And last, but not even close to being least, we have emotions. Now, the emotions, when misguided and untrained, those can lead a person down into the depths of the pit, right? As some of you may very well know through your own experiences, through having heartbreaks, losing family members, and losing friends. And although emotions are a very necessary part of the human experience, it is when they are allowed to get out of hand, that's when they become hazardous, right? And that's because when the emotions are highly engaged, the intellectual faculty becomes less engaged, which then makes a person more likely to do something in that moment that they probably wouldn't do if they were thinking properly. You see that? I see people all the time who get caught up in these petty road rage confrontations where someone gets cut off and then they absolutely lose their mind, right? I witnessed one time a tow truck driver nearly ram his truck into a car because they cut him off, right? He had his windows down, hooting and hollering and talking crazy at the people in the next car and blowing his horn at them for the next two lights going up further, right? He had lost his mind and he was super hot, furious, right? And I've also seen videos online where people cut other people off, and the people that got cut off, they get so mad that they get a gun out and they start shooting at the car going away, right? Foolish types of stuff like this and ignorant types of reaction to these types of petty things is what happens to people when they allow the emotions to run high and run wild, right? And take over the person. These are the types of things that can happen. And so there's a whole lot more on this topic of emotions that deal with things like love, hate, envy, and so forth. But the point here is that we have to use the received power to guide our emotions so they can work as partners with us, right? While we're on the path. So when we have the intellect, the senses, and the emotions all working together, collaborating and cooperating on one accord, then we create balance and poise within our own being. And at that point, you are poised, Urpoise. And so that's a brief breakdown of the first layer understanding of the name, which contains 7 different letters that unfold into a number of different words and ideas that encompass the foundations of Urpoise culture and Urpoise principles. And so hopefully this helps you out, Randall, and has given some clarification on the inquiry on the name Urpoise, right? And so the next part of your comment says this: I'm trying to imagine how religion won't sabotage the whole thing. Our people are the most religious on the planet. So the Urpoise community is not centered around religion at all. It's centered around character, culture, and community development. And religion, as widely practiced in the West, it really doesn't have any place in what it is that we're doing. Real religion, though, is really self-development, which produces practical results. The hoax that the religious leaders have played on the people is making them believe that something outside of them is going to come and change their circumstance and change their condition, right? And we really don't have any type of room for that type of thinking. And so my responsibility is to make sure that the people who want to maintain that type of thinking, that they're weeded out altogether, right? We need to weed all those people out. And that's why I make the videos that I make, and they're constructed with a message that they have dealing with the religious topic in the manner that is dealt with, right? I want to make it clear, very clear, on what we stand for, right? Because excluding people is just as important as including people, right? They're both important. And one of the things that I know is that the message of the Urpoise community being non-religious in the popular sense, that's going to exclude a great number of people. And I see this as a magnificent thing, right? Because we're looking for people who are moving beyond that phase or who are already moved beyond that phase, right? Which leaves us with a small group of people who can make big things happen. Understand? Now, to be clear, we still use some of the religious texts, but we interpret them in a completely different manner. We don't open up the book of Matthew and really think that a Jesus is going to come and return down to the earth and swoop people up and take them. And so we're interpreting it from a lens of self-development, the same way that many of the priests are interpreting it, but they're never going to tell you about it. So again, my job is to make the message as clear as possible on religion, so the wrong people will be excluded, and then we're only left with the right people. So that way there will be no religious sabotage. And so again, I want to thank you for your comment and your question, Randall, and hopefully this has been helpful. Now let's go on to the last question right here from Abani one, which says, is the word Urpoise a term coined from you? Did you invent that? Yes, we did come up with the name ourselves. It's not something that you're going to find anywhere in the dictionary, and it's not something that you're going to find anywhere online that does not pertain to us. And so this was the product of years of contemplating on a name that was versatile and also compact in meaning, and also representative of ideas that could be widely expanded later on down in the future. And so thank you for asking your question, and anyone else who has questions or comments, be sure to leave them down below. Hopefully this has been helpful to someone out there. I want to thank you for watching all the way until the end. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.